Hey there, just a heads up that this episode contains discussions around mental health topics such as depression and anxiety. If you need to reach out to someone for urgent support, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.
My first blog was when I was 14, when the internet wasn't a thing. It was like a fuchsia pink website, and I literally, it was like literally like a Dear Diary thing. And I had a page where I just said nice things about my friends.
That's really nice.
I know. So I literally was like, Mary is nice because she makes everyone laugh. And I'm like, Sally is nice because she always brings nice food. And like literally all my friends, like it makes
wholesome.
me cringe, but it's very wholesome at the same time.
Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, onto today's episode. We're joined by Anthea here today, also known as Rainbow Nourishments in the digital space. Anthea grew up in Sydney and is now based in Canberra, having a background in federal government working in Indigenous and disability issues. She graduated from UNSW with a double degree, majoring in politics, policy and art history with honours. She's now a photographer, recipe developer, food stylist and blogger. Anthea boasts over 242,000 followers on Instagram and has hosted workshops internationally and across Australia. She's also featured across major brands and publications such as BuzzFeed, Well and Good, Live Kindly and HuffPost. Welcome to the podcast, Anthea.
Thank you. Where did you get that information from?
Everywhere.
Okay, I'm just
have
like,
our people.
where did I say that in the past? Is it on my... I guess the internet never deletes things. So.
Exactly.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
The internet's forever.
Wow.
All right, so let's get straight into it. Tell us a bit about yourself, what your ethnicity is, what your childhood was like. Did you go to university, high school, that kind of thing?
So my parents are from Hong Kong. Pretty much, my mum was born in Hong Kong. My dad was born in China, but moved to Hong Kong when he was really young. And they migrated here in the 70s, then had us in the 80s and 90s. So grew up in Sydney in a very, I don't know, it's debatable. I would probably say in a very white neighbourhood. Now it's probably wouldn't say that it is white. Went to school, primary school and high school in the same area, so very mixed childhood in terms of ethnicities. Like definitely had to decide between being Asian and being Caucasian, Australian, which I'll touch on more later. It was a very conventional, like I never took a day off school. Then I went immediately from school to uni, then immediately from uni to working. So I went to UNSW, did a double degree, much to the dislike of my parents, because not the double degree, I'm sure they like that. It was the Bachelor of Arts and the Bachelor of Art History. They're like, you need to study business or you need to do a science subject or do IT, which is completely not in my scope of brain. You know, you do those subjects at school and I did do well in maths and stuff like that.
STEM
and
subjects.
But it wasn't my passion. Like I really liked English and art and society and culture. So I did that. And to their surprise, I did better than they expected, even though they didn't articulate that. Then I applied for a job and I got it in federal government. I don't know. That's kind of a boring story, but
No, it's interesting. It's very linear, would you say?
it's very linear, like as linear as you can get. Yeah.
So then I guess, what was your experience like being in government as well?
All right. So I worked in the department of what it's now called the Social Services, Department of Social Services. So they deal with all the humanity subjects, like such as disability, Indigenous stuff, family leave, domestic violence, all the kind of social policy issues. And I don't know if you guys have been to a uni where you can see the different kind of demographics from each faculty.
Yeah.
So the department, the arts, is always like 5% Asian. So it was even worse in government. In my department, it was probably literally 2 to 5% Asian people, East Asian or South Asian. I don't know. I guess Asian in Australia.
Collectively Asian.
Yeah.
It was interesting because I worked in Indigenous affairs. So there were Indigenous Aboriginal people, but I had a lot of contact with Indigenous companies around Australia. Once I had to go to I organised a federal conference and it went kind of interstate. I kind of did that every 3 months, but one of them was like, it's actually really nice to have an Asian in government, like someone who's coloured. And that was really strange because out of anywhere in the Indigenous affairs area, you'd expect
you would expect people of colour
to be there. Like there were definitely Aboriginal people, but they weren't on. They didn't attend the conferences. It was very specific people who attended the conferences because you had to be the face of government.
Right.
So I was very lucky to be in that position because I had like executive staff who really liked grads, which I was a grad. I started as a grad. So I think so I moved from Sydney to Canberra, and Sydney is very multicultural generally. And
depending on where you live in Sydney.
Generally, yeah. And the first week I moved to Canberra, I had like 3 racial comments just on the street. They're like, I think it was Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year, so I had a few passing comments. Like not necessarily racist, but pointing out the fact that I was Asian. Because when I'm walking around in Sydney, I don't think I am Asian. Look at my Asianness.
You're way more hyper aware when you're not in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. So that was interesting. And just a few people in government who were like, so when did you move to Australia? I'm just like,
I was born here.
Fuck you. Basically, your English is really good. I'm like, well, I hope so, because that's the only language I can speak.
Yeah.
And there's always like literal uncertainties, like, you know, I would apply for a job, might not necessarily get it within government. And
Because of your last name on the resume type of situation?
Yeah. And certain family members would be like, is it because you're Asian? Well, I'd be like, well, I've got no way of proving that. I actually don't think it is, because things in government have to be so transparent that if there is any sign of racism, it has to be convened in a group of 10 people or something. That was more about like the internalized perception of racism that I grew up with. Like if I fail at something, it might be because I'm Asian sort of thing. But I try to not let that affect me too much otherwise.
It gets to your head a lot.
Yeah, because then you just become victimized to everything, which no one really wants. So yeah.
I think it's important to have some level of, you know, awareness to the situation and the environment that we're in as well, because at the end of the day, yes, we're people of color and the stigmas around it as well, and you just don't know who's going to be thinking what.
Absolutely. So like even like when you're going clubbing out of all reasons and a guy approaches you who is an Asian, I'm like, do you have an Asian fetish? Like what is your desire?
What's your agenda?
Exactly. So having to double guess everything, which I guess I'm used to, but I'm also, I also try to be aware of slight, like what's the microaggressions and stuff like that. So
Actually, you know, going back to university, you know, I actually went to UNSW as well.
Okay, cool.
And so back then it was known as COFA, the art department.
COFA. Yes. I went to COFA too.
Yes, alumni.
Sorry, I get really excited when I know someone has to do that.
I mean, like I was there during like the whole construction period as well, so it was just like a chaos, you know, on campus as well, like a giant crater.
I think I left right before then, or it was at the end. But I
I think that, like when I first started, like that was all happening. So a little bit crazy, but I totally get it when you're saying like, you know, you definitely do feel like a minority there. I think there's not, it's like 5%, you know.
COFA is even worse. Like UNSW was pretty Asian. Like they used to say that there were like buses of Asians just being shipped to UNSW. I don't know who said that. Someone like it obviously wasn't me. You know, they're just trying to make their way in Australia, so they can't anyway.
They can't help it.
Exactly. But COFA was definitely like spot the Asian, and if you were Asian, you're pretty westernized.
To fit in, you have to assimilate.
You imagine your parents were what's enthused about the degree you chose, being arts as well. I could top you. I did the ultimate degree to piss off Asian parents, which was like double degree, arts, fine arts.
Okay, all right. Mine was art history. So I guess fine arts. Fine
arts would have been worse because like it's not even just history. It's just
that's
like
true.
It's like painting. Like I did like a painting drawing major. and then I did arts with a film major.
Okay.
So it was like the most artsy degree you could do.
Yeah.
And the ultimate like,
In
piss
your
your Asian
face.
parents off.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I wanted to do just a BA because I just was really passionate about the subjects under a BA.
Yeah.
Then they're like, you need to choose something more serious. I'm like, art history.
The closest thing I can get.
Yeah, which wasn't serious at all. I think it was less serious than the BA, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I did pick majors with my parents in mind because I knew politics was probably one of the more serious ones.
Yeah.
But I actually really like politics. So, did your parents ever accept the fact?
My mom was very supportive.
That's nice.
She, maybe like 10% of her was like, I'm not sure about this, but
Yeah.
90% of her to my face was like, yeah, like, you do you. So she was super supportive. My dad's side, though, was not. So yeah, a little bit of a different story.
Is
Yeah.
he supportive of what you do now?
It's a little bit complex. Like my dad's side of the family are a bit more estranged, so they weren't really a huge part of my life.
Okay.
So like my mom raised me on my own.
Yeah.
So she we're really close, and she's always been supportive of whatever I wanted to do. But my dad's side, even though they weren't involved in my upbringing, still felt
Yeah.
entitled to be like, you should not be doing this.
They do that, don't they? Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand the whole I understand the whole strange thing, but how someone who isn't involved in your life has to have a say in your major life things. Like
Yeah.
I remember my mum saying that if I ever had a wedding, I would have to invite my cousins who I've only seen twice in my life. Like, well, I don't want to spend money on them. So.
Yeah, exactly.
I have the same mindset. I'm like, why do I have to impress people that I haven't seen
Yeah.
for so long?
That's nice that your mum accepted it.
Yeah. I mean, like
would've-
I think I get a lot of the creativity side from her
Yeah.
as well. So I think it's great. I'm
Yeah.
really fortunate in that situation.
Yeah.
But back onto the whole campus experience. I mean, like, I think, when I was around campus and as soon as I kind of was in a class, I it's just go spot the other Asian dude or
Yeah.
Asian girl. The other Asian in the class, and like you could instantly, feel like you can connect with them. Whereas I think, in my experience, in a predominantly white subject or a white class, I think I'd kind of have to put on a different persona.
You do.
have
Be
to
a
wear a
slightly
facade.
different version of yourself.
Yeah, and Copa has a culture of its own. Like it's very, so what are you wearing today? And I think every degree had its own culture. And I think fine arts definitely had a culture.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
in art history, it was very looking at what you were wearing that day. Where do you live in Sydney? That was a big one. What are you smoking? What are you drinking? And stuff like that. So
Surface level, very superficial.
yeah, I would say so, but not like blonde hair, blue eyed, superficial. Very
It
kind
was
of
more
status.
like, I hate using this word. It was more kind of like hipster cred kind of
Yeah,
thing. It
it
was
was. That's the word. Yeah, indie hipster kind of.
It's kind of like UTS in the design building at the moment. It's very, very Newtown-esque.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But not to
basically.
discredit that, I feel like we're kind of crapping on it a little bit. But like there was
Yeah,
a shit ton
it
of
was,
talented
yeah.
people
Yeah.
in my cohort,
Yeah.
and I'm sure in your cohort as
Yeah.
well. And yeah, I think there was super creative and talented people, but there was
Yeah.
definitely that era of social expectation that you kind of had to
Absolutely.
navigate or learn to navigate. Did you find it a little bit difficult to kind of navigate going from I guess high school that was more I guess multicultural, going to a university that wasn't as multicultural?
Okay, so I went to primary school and high school within like 2 kilometers of each other. So my social group was kind of the same from one to the other. When I first entered high school, it actually wasn't very multicultural. I was probably one out of 4 Australian Chinese females. Australian Asian guys, there were heaps of them, but not females. I don't know why. So I didn't feel it was too multicultural until the later years when people started migrating
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Australia. I actually found that there were more Asians in UNSW main campus. Like I was
Yeah.
kind of culture shocked, not culture
Yeah,
shocked, but like
it is,
it was nice.
It was a little bit comforting when you move from that bubble into,
Yeah.
oh, hey, there's other people like me.
Yeah, because I had Australian, Chinese, Asian, whatever friends from primary school who went to other schools and they went to the same uni. So I loved that we could hang out. Not just because they were Asian, it was just because it was a common ground that you didn't
Yeah.
have to explain yourself on.
There's a lot of cultural nuances, a lot of things that you just have in common that are very comforting.
Yeah.
Going off of your parents, let's circle back to that. Were they quite strict with you during your childhood?
So when I was a child, I thought they were not strict because
Okay.
they're like, well, I can do dancing, like I can do ballet, I can do choir, I can run around the house and stuff like that. But as I age, I'm just like, I think they were, but not in an overt way. So my parents, I realize, my mom is very introverted. So if she wants something, she won't always articulate it. So you kind of have to guess. You have to like stab around in the dark until you figure it out. So while she didn't articulate all the time that she wanted me to do particular things, sometimes she did, but sometimes she didn't. Overall, they both had very certain expectations of all of us.
What kind of expectations?
They would date an Asian person.
Yeah.
That would date a guy. Or I mean, like, well, for me at least, because I had two brothers. If my brothers dated guys, that would be another thing. But anyway,
Marriage straight after university?
to not date anyone in high school
And not date anyone in university until you've graduated and get married.
which I like combated three or four times. No sex before marriage was a big one.
Are they religious?
No, kind of. Oh, I don't know.
Just traditional.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, like my mom's Catholic, my dad's Buddhist, but they didn't go to church, but they wouldn't say no to going to church.
Okay.
That's another story.
Yeah.
I remember once in primary school, one of my friends a lot of my friends were religious, but one of my friends like, oh, you should come to church with me on the weekend. I'd be like, oh, I want to, but I've got tutoring. So eventually I was able to go to church, but my mom pulled me out of church because I had to go to tutoring. Oh. So she chose tutoring over church.
Yeah.
But I had to fight to go to church because at church you could socialize with people. Like, I'm not religious, like in any stretch of the imagination. But you could socialize in church, but you could not socialize in tutoring. Yeah. So that was the funner option compared to tutoring, which is ironic. But at least you had a sense of community. So so not too religious, but they do mention the higher power sometimes.
Yeah. Did they instill a lot of these values onto your brothers as well, especially your older brother?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how has that kind of impacted him, do you think?
I think both of my brothers are really quiet, if that's one way of putting it. I would be considered very extroverted compared to them, like overly extroverted, which I'm not. I'm quite in the middle. So if that says anything about them, both of them are very timid, which has had its issues with their lives and well-being and social circles. I think they haven't had much support in the family because my dad's not really around. When we grew up, my dad wasn't really around that much. Okay. So they didn't have that male role figure. So both of my brothers were unfortunately bullied in school or teased heavily, and they really suffered from that.
Did you guys go to school together?
Yeah, we all went to the same primary school, but I went to the same high school as my little brother, but a different high school from my older brother.
Right.
So I think they didn't have that support from the family when they had issues at school. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's evident now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you talked to your parents about it, or have they talked to your parents about it?
Yeah, I've talked to my parents about it. It does not go down well.
So mental health isn't something that you guys really talk about at home?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. But you seem to be quite a big advocate for it. You've started voicing a lot more about mental health and the importance of it as well. Can you touch on a little bit about your experience?
Yeah. Both of my parents are very anxious, like very,
high strong.
Very, very high strung. So I think we all grew up with that, but I am probably more of an empath and I'm a female, so I kind of really absorbed that. So I've always been slightly anxious. But when I was like 13 to 15, it really kind of just blew up into like depression and anxiety and like other ugly things that I don't want to say because it would trigger people. Yeah. Just really, really not nice stuff. But, I was still a child back then, so I couldn't get any counselling, and I didn't want to get counselling. That was like, to get counselling, you needed to go through your parents, and that was the last thing that I wanted. So it was messy. It was really, really, really messy.
It was also at a time where like getting help for mental health was not as accessible back then.
Exactly.
You know, like now you've got a lot of services like BetterHelp. You've got you know, a lot of different avenues with technology to kind of keep it accessible, but also very confidential and very, you know, you have more control over how, you know, who you work with or who you talk to.
And so many resources online. Like back then, the internet wasn't really a thing. Like you might, I don't think Google existed. It was Yahoo back then. And I didn't really know how to use that. But luckily I had a few friends who were going through different disorders. So I was able to be like, that's what I have. One of my friends in particular had seen a doctor. So she kind of talked me through just like, not emotions, but just talked me through, yes, I've got depression. You might too, have a rate of this and stuff like that. So that was really nice. Luckily, I kind of like, I did recover just because my class structure changed. But then everything kind of came back when I was 19. Bad breakup. Incidents happened when I was 19, which triggered everything. And it was that if I thought being 13 to 15 was bad, when I was 19 it was 100 times worse. So basically my best friend passed away and she was Australian Chinese. And that was really shocking because she was only 19. It was an accident, like pure accident. She wasn't, you know, suicide or anything. And that was difficult because at that age, one, you don't really know people who have passed away, and two, she was my best friend.
Yeah, it's really hard.
That was definitely the most difficult thing that I had ever experienced. I don't wish it upon my worst enemy. So, but that, I guess, yeah, that was extremely messy. But I didn't have the coping mechanisms at the age of 19 to deal with that. Yeah, like most 19-year-olds won't. So I was seeing a psychologist at the time because I had depression before she passed away. So, and that helped in the short term. Then I just had to deal with it in my 20s. So.
And how did you navigate that throughout your 20s?
It was pretty messy. I think a lot of my friends or people who knew me as acquaintances didn't really know because there's ways of like, I figured out ways of hiding things, and because it wasn't a topic that was discussed in my family, mental health, so you figure out ways to skip around the subject. And I got through uni and I got through work and everything fine, but it was very difficult. Yeah.
Of course. That's not something that's easy for someone just to mask over and deal with, especially at 19.
Yeah.
And it's such a pivotal time of your life and you don't really expect anything like that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say that I'm completely over it now, but I think that's just what grief is. Like I saw something on Instagram the other day saying that grief doesn't necessarily go away, but you build things around it so you don't feel it as much. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that with us.
That's all right.
Yeah. This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show. In Asian households, we've touched on how we don't really talk about things and we skip over certain topics. Why do you think our culture is like that? I guess also our parents migrate here and they have to deal with a lot of stuff by themselves and there's no resources for them to deal with.
I think it's purely just comes from like not having enough dialogue or not knowing how to articulate it. I think every generation of Asian migrants have always had to deal with their own, you know, mental burdens. It's not easy being an immigrant, and then they don't know how to, you know, articulate that or communicate that, and then therefore with our generation, you know, we don't have the same dialogue around that either.
We also hold on to the trauma.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think like historically there hasn't been a time with Asians or Westernized people who were like, yes, let's embrace depression, because it was seen in the 19th century as an illness that you would have to like lie on, like even...
It was like being possessed. It was like
it was being
witchcraft.
Possessed. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. That's what I mean by my arms. So I think it comes from that as well. A combination of things. But then there's also the people who chose to migrate from another country to here, why did they migrate? What was the push factor? Did they have an issue with their family? Do they want a better education? Did they not have a good upbringing? Not felt supported by their families. So
a lot of the time it's also war and
absolutely,
war and,
absolutely,
and the trauma that comes with
exactly.
that too. Yeah.
Definitely can create mental health issues in itself. So I think with my parents, they don't talk about it because I think they grew up in an environment where it is literally seen as something physically is wrong with your brain.
Yeah.
Like I remember growing up and my mum would be like, someone had depression and she'd be like, she's sick in the head or something like that. But I guess that was the main dialogue at that time. On one hand, if you didn't grow up with it, it would be hard to change your ways. On the other hand, there's also certain personalities that don't like to deal with.
Yeah.
It is
topics.
painful to talk about, at times as well. It's not easy to open up. But, I think there's also been a lot of progress that we need to acknowledge. I think
Absolutely.
in the younger generation, now the kids growing up now have access to so many resources.
Yeah.
And the more resources we have, the more ways we can articulate and to navigate these situations and, our feelings, essentially. Yeah.
Like I can't say that all Asian parents are like that because like my best friend's parents did see a psychologist after she passed away, understandably. Like if anyone saw a psychologist, it would have to be them. And they talked about it with me and that was really...
That's really good.
Nice. Like I wouldn't say that they're overly liberal. I mean, not liberal in the government sense, but overly left-wing,
Progressive, I guess.
Progressive, yeah. But them seeing a psychologist was just like, yeah, people can change. So I also think it's about people's willingness to change. Some parents just are quite stubborn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some parents are like, okay, there's new information coming out. Let's explore that,
Do you have any advice for other young people trying to navigate the mental health space and where they can go, or any advice with dealing with it?
It depends on the situation, but like if I had to give advice to my younger self, it'd be to go and see a therapist as early as possible. Like I first saw a therapist when I was 19, which was relatively early. But if I saw one earlier, it would have lessened the blow of everything. See a therapist and find a trusted friend who you can talk to, which really helped me. And journal, I know it kind of sounds lame, but like just journal out your feelings and just know that, I know it's like everyone's like, you're not alone, but, I'm not sitting there with them while they're crying, want to like, cry. But at the same time, like some people have had bad experiences with psychologists. Like I haven't had great psychologists. So it is definitely tough to go out and seek one when you're in that vulnerable state. And to openly be like, yes, I don't feel well. What can I do about it? I need to change. And that is really...
It's a big step.
Intimidating.
Yeah. I also wanted to touch on representation a little bit as well. Especially I know you're in the influencer blogging space. And I know that space from experience is not very diverse or has a lot of representation that is celebrated. What are your thoughts on this and how have you felt being Asian female?
I do vegan desserts. One, I think Asians are very represented in the vegan world and in the desserts world, in every single world. I guess I have friends who do more Asian food, or and obviously that is. But what I would like to see is to have recognition of Asian people who don't create Asian food and are still Asian. Like it's like saying as an Aboriginal person you can only do dot painting. Like
you don't want to be funneled into this singular thing.
And it's the whole stereotype that if you have a certain ethnicity, you have to do these 5 things that make up your identity. Whereas culture is evolving. Culture isn't just about making fried rice. Not saying this is no bad blood to people who make fried rice. I love fried rice, but you can do more things than just make Asian food and still be recognized as an Asian person.
I think there's also a lot of cultural exchange because of how diverse Australia is. So there's a lot of fusion in food right now. So yeah, I think it's great. Like you don't have to stick to your lane. Like you can. I think you can stick to your roots and be really good at what you do. But I think you can also branch out and do other things. And,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, no bad blood to anyone who does, like, but it's definitely needs more representation in all areas. Like sometimes people are just like, well, have you been discriminated against with like sponsored campaigns and stuff like that? But it's hard for me to say because I'm not on the PR team being like, I'm not going to pick her because she is Asian or something. Like, I think in that respect, I might not be picked because I do vegan food and they just want someone who does mainstream food or something.
Yeah. Have you had any specific experiences where you feel like you've been singled out?
Not necessarily as an Asian, but definitely as a vegan. Many times as a vegan or as someone who might not appeal to the mainstream crowd, but they obviously don't always say that. Yeah, obviously, like if they say no to me, then I realize that they're only working with Caucasian people. I'm like, that's interesting. I wonder why.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely some brands who I've never seen work with an Asian person.
Yeah.
Yeah, which like I do understand from a very sterile brand perspective because they want to appeal to mainstream audience because it's the majority of the population, but there's also something called ethics.
Yes, of course.
And Australia, it's not just white Australia, like it's evolving.
Multicultural.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, I just want to kind of get a better idea of how long you've been doing vlogging. How did you get into it? How did you get into photography?
My first blog was when I was 14, when the internet wasn't a thing. It was like a fuchsia pink website. And I literally, it was like literally like a Dear Diary thing. And I had a page where I just said nice things about my friends.
That's really nice.
I know. So I literally was like, Mary is nice because she makes everyone laugh. And I'm like, Sally is nice because she always brings nice food. And like literally all my friends, like it kind of makes me cringe, but it's very wholesome at the same time. Because back then my friends were my world. So I had that, then I had like a travel blog. And I've had a blog almost all the time since I was 15. So that was 20 years ago. Before Rainbow Nourishments, I started it maybe 7 to 8 years ago. I was working in government. So government was, the first half of it was great. Like I won't, get that wrong. Had a great experience. But towards the end, I'm like, this isn't really my thing. Then I was sick because I had depression and stuff. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to do something I'm more passionate about and live more according to my values. So when you're recovering from something like that, they're like, okay, you're doing all these things, but what are your values and how can you make your life more value orientated?
Yeah.
So I just started up an Instagram account where I posted like smoothie bowls and stuff like
I remember
that.
those days.
I know. The carefree life. Work was offering voluntary redundancies. So I just took one. I had never earned $1 from Rainbow Nourishments at that point. But I'm like, well, I'm getting paid to quit a job that I don't like. So then I freaked out because I'm like, oh, crap, I don't know how to pay my rent. Then I posted a cake online on a local vegan Facebook group and everyone's like, wow, blah, blah, blah. Do you take cake orders? I'm like, no, but I can. Then I literally set up a pricing list when I was at my partner's place. We were watching TV. We're like, okay, how much would a cake cost? Then I had a cake business. So I used that as a segue to figure out the blogging thing because that was 7 to 8 years ago. So there were literally only like 10 vegan food bloggers at that time. And that was a good way to allow me to figure out how to get sponsorships and stuff like that.
And how did the cake business go from there? It was almost like a funding project for you to fund Rainbow Nourishments.
It was good. Like I don't regret it. It grew up quite quickly. Like I got catering orders in the first week. And I was very fortunate with customers. Like I had a lot of big clients or cafes come to me and ask for like hundreds of cakes every week. It's
a lot of work.
So I hired people, like it was blah, blah, blah. But towards the end, it was either that I had to scale down or open up a factory. And I'm like, I don't enjoy doing this.
It grew really big
repetitive.
then.
Yeah, it was
Full operation.
yeah, it was pretty full on.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, I don't enjoy this. And I had injuries in my wrists because I have really small wrists and I had tendinitises. But most importantly, I just didn't enjoy it. I found it really, really repetitive. Then I just closed it when my book offer came in because I was offered to write a book at the same time. Yeah.
Do you want to talk us through writing a book as well?
God. It was like 3 years ago. So
Still relevant.
it was full on.
Yeah.
I had 3 months to write and photograph the whole book.
3 months.
Yeah, I know.
lovely.
It was
Holy shit.
the most stressful project I've ever worked on. It's like vegan and gluten-free desserts as well. Like vegan desserts is hard and gluten-free
Gluten-free
was
is
like a
even
freaking
more.
nightmare.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know I needed money at that time. So I'm like, okay, this is a good project until I figure things out again. I kind of just did it. It was really insane. I don't think I've ever worked on hard in my life.
How did you feel after you finally submitted it and you're like,
Bloody
it's done?
burnt out.
Yeah.
Like I never wanted to look at the cake again, to be honest. Yeah, it was a bit traumatic. But
Are you glad you did it though? I mean,
yeah,
as an
absolutely.
experience?
At that time, it was like I was very grateful for the opportunity. It was just very taxing.
Of course.
Yeah.
How did you get into photography?
I had a point and shoot camera, like a legit Canon. And I always took pictures of food, like a typical Asian and stuff like that. I was really passionate about visual arts in high school and I really wanted to do photography. So it just gave me a chance to really learn a skill that I never had the chance to learn. My first photography setup was on my bed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know. I shot my whole ebook. Like I have an ebook that I published 7 years ago and it was all shot on my bed.
Wow.
On like photography boards and
Yeah.
stuff. So it wasn't intentional. Then I just realized I enjoyed it because I like the visual aspect
It sounds
of
like you
it.
just found a way to kind of combine your two passions together. in a
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
It was the one thing that I could like do that I was completely focused in and I didn't have to think about anything else. When I was cooking, like I'm not always mindful when I'm cooking, I'm burning stuff and like stressed and stuff like that. But photography was like one thing I'm focused exactly on what I'm looking at. Nothing else is there. Mind you, it can be very stressful.
Yes.
Like sometimes now I'm like sweating and like hairs everywhere and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of just fell into it. It wasn't really.
I think like because you've had such a extensive background in blogging, it kind of makes sense to document not just in a worded way, but also through photography and visuals as well. So yeah.
Were you self-taught? Did you seek out any courses?
I did a 1-day course because I didn't know the difference between SEO and aperture and the other things that I still can't remember. Like if I look at the camera, I'll know how to figure it out, but I'm not good with like names, technical terms. So I needed a course to teach me that. But other than that, I kind of just learned it and
By
made lots of
doing,
mistakes.
right?
And I think that's how I learn, especially with something that's hands-on. Like I used to read books and read books about it, but it just wouldn't, nothing would stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess YouTube was great.
YouTube's great.
Yeah.
In terms of, I guess, working with clients and stuff, how did you transition from just blogging into landing clients or getting featured?
They kind of just came. Okay, so I guess when you're on Instagram, you get companies DM you all the time. Then eventually it just kind of built up. Like there were definitely phases where I'm like, I don't have any work. I need to reach out. I would reach out to like hundreds, okay, not tens of clients and stuff like that. So yeah, they would just DM me, then we just have a conversation from there. Or sometimes there will be one client that talks to another client, then they kind of just
Word of mouth.
Yeah, I don't think I have met any of them in person. It was mostly just, I guess they probably see me on Instagram or something.
It's like you've built an online portfolio as well for them to access.
Yeah.
How did you find the transition from going to, being an employee, working in government, which is very, supportive in terms of taking care of what you need from a financial perspective, everything is proper.
Yeah.
How did you go from that to being a freelancer? And
It was like wearing a suit, jumping into cold water, literally.
Yeah.
Working in government was probably the most structured. Okay, it wasn't that structured because I worked in social services, but one of the most structured environments that a person could work in. Everyone responds to emails within half an hour and stuff like that. Then going from that to making cakes was really a shock. Pros and cons. Government, I was in federal government, so it's very abstract and very distant from your subject versus being really hands-on. So hands-on that you get injuries.
Of course.
So my biggest issue with working by myself is working by myself because I was always used to having people around. Not that I talked a lot in the office. It was mostly just like going into the office and being like, hey, how are you going? Not well, whatever. We can talk crap and, talk about how boring the weather is and stuff like that. But even that can break up your day.
Yeah.
So
It's just little social interactions.
exactly. So when I hired employees, that was really fun because they were like, yay, we can hang out and eat together. And they were like, okay, this is a bit strange. She's meant to be our boss. But like, no, let's do this. So I would probably say that was the biggest issue. And the financial stability, like I was used to having like a very healthy paycheck every fortnight to earning $200 a week or something and being over the moon about that. Like I'm a kind of person who's very hard on myself in terms of with everything, but I really set a goal to like I need to be financially independent. I was with my partner at the time. I'm still with him now, but I made sure that I didn't ask him for any money ever. My parents never. With just the way that I grew up, I really wanted to be separate from everyone.
Yeah.
So there were pros and cons to, yeah.
Nice.
Just conscious of time as well, but there are a lot of young people at the moment or people who are looking to transition their careers. Blogging and being on Instagram and social media is really big right now.
Yeah.
Do you have any words of advice for people who want to either start blogging, especially if they're really young, as a career, or people who are already in, corporate or a very stable career at the moment and want to try something new?
It depends on the person, and I guess it was a little different from when I started, but I would honestly say that don't go in with the intention of becoming an influencer. I think that's the worst way you can do it. You have to be passionate about what you're doing because if you just want to go in for the fame, whatever you call it, people will read through that and you won't have much substance. I went in with the passion of cooking. So I think that's how everyone should do it. And don't overwhelm yourself with everything initially. Like if you want to start up a blog, yes, you can look at SEO. It is important. But if you look up everything when you first start, you never get anywhere because it's intimidating. Like I didn't look at SEO for 5 years. And
Now you're here.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess the important thing is just to start for the right reasons.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I probably would say grow a really good support network of just like 3 people who you can talk to and whine about. Yeah, I can. And whine to.
So having a support network to kind of encourage you and when you kind of feel kind of a bit of self-doubt and be like, hey,
exactly.
Yeah, why am I doing this? Should I still do this?
Yeah. And also be careful because some people are out there to use you. And I've had that a bit. So just keep your boundaries. Keep your boundaries and don't be afraid to ask for help at the same times. But you have to figure out. It's like friends in high school. You had to figure out like who you can trust and who you can't. So and there's nothing wrong with making mistakes.
Yeah. It's really good advice.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans for the next few years?
Well, my partner and I want to move out from Canberra because I do not like it there very strongly. Sorry. So wherever we move, I want to start a team of people helping me develop recipes and clean and things like that. Like work is so full on at the moment, and I'm almost always burnt out, and I just need people to help me. And I'm able to get people in, but I just need to be living somewhere stable for that to happen.
Of course.
Yeah.
How long, when are you going to move out of Canberra?
Hopefully in the next year.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I've been saying this for around 5 years. So.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane or Perth.
I'm Team Sydney. My partner's Team Melbourne.
Is that because both your families are from each respective spot?
And I think I get along with Sydney people more because I grew up there. So yeah, I can't be that far away from my friends because my friends are friends for a reason.
Yes,
so.
exactly. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today.
My pleasure.
Where can we find you online and across your website?
www.rainbownourishments.com or Instagram or Facebook, and I'm trying to get into TikTok, but watch this space. Yeah.
Yes, at Rainbow Nourishments.
Yes, Rainbow Nourishments. Yeah.
Amazing. We'll put it in the show notes anyways. But yeah, thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And why not share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too? Also, make sure you head over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and to receive the latest updates and get notified when the next episode drops. If you know a great guest we should feature, email us at contact@levelasianpodcast.com or DM us on our socials in the show notes. Catch you on the next episode.